Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive with Books and Dites.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Today, we're exploring The Molecule of More by Daniel Z. Lieberman and Mike Long.
Oh, a fascinating choice, and I think listeners are really going to enjoy this one.
Absolutely, this book delves into the world of dopamine and how this single molecule shapes so much of our lives, from our desires and ambitions to our struggles with things like addiction.
It really flips the script on how we usually think about dopamine.
For sure, most people associate dopamine with pleasure, but as we'll find out, it's not that simple.
Not at all. One of the key takeaways from this book, and we'll definitely dig into this more as we go, is that dopamine isn't actually about pleasure itself.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's more about the anticipation, the wanting the pursuit of something that we perceive as rewarding.
So it's not about the destination, it's about the journey, so to speak.
You got it. And this is where that idea of dopamine as the molecule of more comes in.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
Well, the book argues that dopamine is always pushing us to seek out more experiences, more rewards, more achievement.
It's like that feeling you get when you're really looking forward to something like a vacation.
Right, or that new gadget you've had your eye on.
You're not actually on vacation or using the gadget yet, but the anticipation, the buildup, that's where dopamine is really at play.
Precisely. And this is where things start to get really interesting, because this constant drive for more can sometimes work against us.
In what way?
Well, think about it. Even when we achieve something we've been working towards, that initial rush of satisfaction often fades pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. I know that feeling. You work so hard for that promotion, and then a few weeks later, it's just like, okay, what's next?
Exactly. And the book explains this through the lens of two key systems in our brains, the desire circuit and the control circuit.
Okay, I'm listening.
So the desire circuit, fueled by dopamine, is all about future rewards. It's what motivates us to set goals, make plans, and strives for something better.
It's like the gas pedal pushing us forward.
Exactly. Now, the control circuit, on the other hand, is more about present moment enjoyment. It's linked to feelings of contentment and satisfaction with what we already have.
So it's like the brakes helping us appreciate the here and now.
Precisely. And as you can imagine, these two systems are often at odds with each other.
It's like a constant tug of war in our brains between wanting more and being content with what we have.
Exactly. And as we'll see throughout this deep dive, dopamine plays a major role in this ongoing battle.
And this dopamine-driven desire for more also has a huge impact on how we experience romantic relationships.
Oh, absolutely.
Think about those early stages of falling in love, the intense longing, the butterflies, the feeling that you can't get enough of the other person.
It's like dopamine is orchestrating this whole whirlwind of emotions.
It's intoxicating, but as we all know, that initial rush doesn't last forever.
True. That's because as the relationship progresses, dopamine levels naturally start to decline.
So what happens then?
Well, other neurochemicals like oxytocin and vasopressin step in to foster feelings of attachment bonding and long-term commitment.
It's like dopamine gets the party started, and then other hormones come in to build a foundation for a lasting connection.
Makes sense, but here's the thing. Some people seem to be perpetually stuck in that honeymoon phase, jumping from one relationship to the next, always chasing that initial dopamine high.
I've definitely known a few people like that, always seeking that next spark.
And this is where the book introduces a really fascinating concept called the Coolidge Effect.
The what effect?
The Coolidge Effect, basically, it describes our brain's tendency to crave novelty, especially when it comes to romantic partners.
So even if we're in a happy and fulfilling relationship, there's still a part of our brain that's looking for something new.
It's not necessarily about being unhappy with what we have.
I see. So it's more like this primal urge for new experiences, new possibilities.
Right. It's like a built-in mechanism to keep us on the lookout for potential mating opportunities, even if we're already coupled up.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It is, and the book actually tells a funny story about President Calvin Coolidge and his wife to illustrate this concept.
Oh, I'd love to hear it.
Well, apparently, President and Mrs. Coolidge were visiting a farm, and Mrs. Coolidge noticed a rooster mating quite frequently.
Okay.
So she asked the farmer, how often does that happen?
I can only imagine what the farmer said.
Well, he replied, dozens of times each day, and Mrs. Coolidge said, tell that to the president.
Oh, no, I see where this is going.
When President Coolidge heard this, he asked, same hen every time?
Ha. I bet the answer was no.
You guessed it, the farmer said, oh no, Mr. President, a different hen every time, to which President Coolidge replied, tell that to Mrs. Coolidge.
That's hilarious and a perfect illustration of the Coolidge effect.
It certainly is, but dopamine's influence goes way on our love lives.
Of course it does. We see its effects everywhere.
It's a driving force behind creativity, innovation, that spark of genius that propels humanity forward.
So are you saying that all the great thinkers and artists throughout history were basically just high on dopamine?
Not exactly, but think about people like Einstein, Mozart, Picasso. these individuals were likely driven by exceptionally high levels of dopamine.
It's like their brains were wired for novelty and exploration, always seeking out new ideas, new ways of seeing the world.
Precisely, and that relentless pursuit of the unknown is what allowed them to break boundaries and create things that had never been seen or heard before.
So a healthy dose of dopamine is essential for anyone who wants to shake things up, come up with that groundbreaking invention, or write that masterpiece.
It certainly seems that way.
Maybe we should all be chasing a few more dopamine hits then.
So hold on, there's a catch. High dopamine levels can be a double-edged sword.
So?
While they can fuel incredible creativity and innovation, they can also be linked to restlessness, impulsivity, and even mental health challenges.
It's like a high-powered engine, amazing potential, but it needs to be handled with care.
A very apt analogy, and the book does provide some examples of this darker side of dopamine in the world of creative geniuses.
Like who?
Well, for instance, it mentions Vincent van Gogh and Beethoven.
Two incredibly brilliant and troubled individuals.
Exactly, and the book suggests that their intense drive and creative output might have been fueled by very high dopamine levels, but it also came at a cost.
So it seems like finding that balance is key, harnessing the power of dopamine without letting it consume us.
Exactly, and that's something we'll delve into further in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm looking forward to it. This is already so fascinating, and I can't wait to explore more of what the molecule of more has to offer.
Me too. It's a real eye-opener.
To be continued.
Definitely. And you know what? This whole dopamine thing, it really gets to the heart of addiction.
Oh, absolutely. Addiction is a complex beast, but it's clear that dopamine plays a central role.
It's funny, we often think of addiction as being all about pleasure, right?
All right, like people get addicted to things because they feel good.
Exactly. But this book makes a really compelling argument that addiction is less about pleasure and more about this relentless pursuit of dopamine stimulation.
So you're saying it's not really about enjoying the substance or activity itself.
Not entirely, at least not in the long run.
It's more about chasing that dopamine rush, even if it ultimately leads to negative consequences.
Precisely, addictive substances and behaviors, whether it's drugs, alcohol, gambling, or even excessive social media use, they all hijack our dopamine system.
So they're basically tapping into this primal part of our brain.
Exactly. They trigger this surge of dopamine, creating this feeling of euphoria and reward, and that reinforces the behavior, makes us want to repeat it.
It's like creating a shortcut to that dopamine hit, bypassing all the natural ways we get those rewards in our lives.
A perfect analogy, and the problem is our brains, they develop a tolerance to these artificial dopamine spikes.
Oh yeah, that's the classic downward spiral of addiction. You need more and more of the substance or behavior to get the same effect.
And that's how people get caught in this vicious cycle of craving and tolerance, always chasing a high that they can never quite reach.
It's like digging a hole deeper and deeper, hoping to find something at the bottom, but all you find is more emptiness.
A powerful image, and I think what's so relevant about this book is that it doesn't just focus on those traditional addictions.
Like drugs and alcohol.
Right. It also explores the addictive nature of things that are so prevalent in our modern lives, like social media, smartphones, video games.
Oh yeah, I mean, everyone's glued to the screens these days, constantly checking notifications, scrolling through feeds.
And it's not a coincidence. These technologies are designed to exploit our dopamine system.
They're like digital slot machines, always promising that next hit of dopamine, that next viral video.
Exactly. They keep us hooked with these intermittent rewards, and before we know it, we've spent hours lost in this digital world.
It's scary how easily we can fall into these patterns.
It is, but being aware of how these things work can help us make more conscious choices about how we interact with technology.
Absolutely. Well, before we get too deep into the solutions, I want to touch on another fascinating aspect of dopamine that the book explores.
What's that?
Its role in shaping our political beliefs.
Oh yeah, this is where things get really interesting.
The book suggests that people with higher dopamine levels might be more drawn to progressive ideologies.
It's a bold claim, but it makes sense when you consider that dopamine is linked to novelty-seeking, risk-taking, a desire for change.
All qualities that are often associated with progressive views.
Exactly. And on the flip side, individuals with lower dopamine levels might be more inclined towards conservative ideologies.
Which tend to emphasize tradition, stability, maintaining the existing social order.
Right, so it's not about saying one ideology is better than the other.
It's about acknowledging that our neurochemistry might be playing a role in shaping our worldviews.
And how we approach things like social change and political systems.
I never thought about it that way, but it's fascinating to consider.
It is, and it really highlights just how pervasive dopamine's influence is in our lives.
It affects everything from our relationships and addictions to our political beliefs and even our drive to succeed.
Absolutely. Speaking of success, the book also dives into how dopamine fuels the ambition and drive of high achievers.
People like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Oprah, Serena Williams, individuals who have reached incredible heights in their respective fields.
The book argues that these individuals are often driven by exceptionally high levels of dopamine.
They're always setting bigger goals, taking on new challenges, never quite feeling satisfied with their accomplishments.
Exactly. It's like they have the internal motor that never stops running, always pushing them to achieve more.
But that kind of relentless pursuit can also have a downside, right?
Oh, for sure. It can lead to burnout, workaholism, a feeling of never being good enough.
It's like they're on a treadmill they can't get off.
Exactly. And this brings us to a crucial question. How do we manage this powerful molecule?
It's clear that dopamine is a force to be reckoned with.
It certainly is. So how do we manage it, right? This powerful dopamine, how do we harness it without letting it kind of take over?
That's the big question, right? I mean, we all want to achieve our goals. We want to feel that sense of reward, but we don't want to become slaves to the dopamine chase.
Exactly. And thankfully, the book does offer some guidance.
Okay, I'm all ears.
One of the key strategies they highlight is cultivating mindfulness and gratitude.
Oh, that's so important. Those practices are always coming up.
Right. And it makes sense when you think about it because it's about shifting our focus from what's next to what is.
Appreciating the present moment, finding contentment in what we already have instead of constantly looking ahead to that next goal, the next milestone.
Precisely. It's about training our brains to savor those simple things, the everyday moments that we often take for granted.
It's like hitting the pause button on that dopamine treadmill.
Exactly. And the book argues that by practicing mindfulness and gratitude, we can actually start to rewire our dopamine circuitry.
So we're not so easily hooked by those external rewards.
Right. And another key strategy is limiting those artificial dopamine surges.
You mean like those hits we get from social media, junk food, excessive screen time?
Exactly. All those things that provide that instant gratification but ultimately leave us feeling empty.
I know, I definitely need to work on that. I'm so easily sucked into the endless scroll of social media.
We all are. It's designed to be that way, but by becoming more aware of those triggers and setting healthy boundaries, we can regain control.
It's like we need to go on a dopamine detox.
In a way, yes. It's about breaking those feedback loops that keep us hooked on that instant gratification.
So we can start to appreciate those more natural and sustainable sources of reward.
Exactly. And this all ties into the bigger picture of finding balance.
Because we don't want to demonize dopamine altogether, right?
Of course not. Dopamine is essential. It's what motivates us. It drives us to create, to achieve.
It makes life exciting, gives us that sense of purpose.
Exactly. So the goal isn't to eliminate dopamine. It's to learn to live with it in a healthier way.
To harness its power for good without letting it control us.
Precisely. And that's where finding meaning and purpose beyond just achievement comes in.
So connecting to something larger than ourselves, something that gives our lives direction and fulfillment beyond just chasing those dopamine hits.
Right. It could be through our relationships, our work, our creative pursuits, our contributions to our community.
When we find something that truly resonates with our values, it gives us a deeper sense of satisfaction that's not so fleeting.
Exactly. It helps us break free from that constant need for more.
This has been such an insightful deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of how dopamine shapes my thoughts, my behaviors, my choices.
I'm glad to hear that, and I hope our listeners feel the same way.
This book, The Molecule of More, it's a real eye-opener.
It is, and I highly recommend checking it out.
Absolutely. Listeners can find a link to the book in the episode description.
And be sure to subscribe to Books and Bites for more deep dives into fascinating books.
We've got so much more to explore together. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time, happy reading, everyone.